Welcome to Syntax. On today's Supper Club, we have Sarah Vessels from GitHub here. She's a staff software engineer at GitHub, and she's been there for 8 years working on all kinds of things like GitHub sponsors, discussions, branch renaming, pinned repositories, private graph contributions, and a ton of stuff. And we're going to be talking a lot about code reviews. We're going to be talking about GitHub, the process of merging code in a project and working in a collaborative environment. My name is Scott Tolinski. With me as always is Wes. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so code reviews. We have a lot of developers who listen to this show, and maybe they haven't been a part of big teams, or they've been a part of big teams, or they haven't done this process of a code review. I read a blog post of yours that was extremely good. We'll link to it in the show about the process of code reviews. And I kind of wanted to start off there. So could you explain to developers who might not be aware, what's the deal with a code review? What's the premise? Why would somebody do a code review, and what does that entail?
Okay, so code review is having your team, having other people with context on what you're trying to build, the bug you're trying to fix, anything you're doing in a repository, getting them to look over your changes. This is assuming you're using like pull requests, merge requests, if you're on GitLab, that you're not just throwing your code out there to the main branch. So it's part of the process. I think you might have automated testing, you might have automated deploys to some kind of staging environment, stuff like that to help you assess, like, did I do the right thing? Did I fix the bug? Did I keep from breaking something else? Does this look right? Getting another human involved in the process to get their assessment, because 2 eyes can be better than one. Like, for me, when I get to building something, it's like I'll get fully into it, and you get into the weeds of the thing. You remember, like, oh, I have to do this particular change because otherwise it breaks in this particular way. And it's like you can get real caught up in it and lose track of context around it, the bigger picture. At least on a team, you're not developing in isolation. Like, other people are going to have to deal with what you put out there. Like, besides the end users, like actually using the software that you create, like the other devs on your team today, the people who will inherit this code in the future after a reorg, after team change, turnover, whatever, like they need to be able to understand it and iterate on it too. And so code review is a great way of introducing your stuff to them, and it gives you like a space to explain what even were you thinking here. Like, why did you build it this way? Why is it ugly in this particular way? Like, there might be a good reason, and you can kind of document that with tests, with code comments, whatever. But some stuff, it's going to be easier for them to ask on your pull request via a comment, like, why'd you do it this way? And then like, that pull request, that merge request, that acts as like an artifact of the repository as much as any commit or piece of code, like where you can search for it and look back on it later and say, like, this is what people were thinking at that time. This is the series of events that led to the code being in this state. These were the issues they were working on. This was like the user bug report, like whatever.
Yeah.
It's the breadcrumb trail.
Yeah, I always like seeing that, in like being able to go back in time and say, like, what the hell were they thinking at this time? Or why did we make that decision? Or even sometimes I'll put in a pull request and someone will say, like, that is not the way I would have tackled it, and it getting their 2 cents in. It kind of sucks because it's maybe a little bit too late for that, but it's better than having to like push something to merge something, and now you're responsible for that water bottle for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Yeah, it is funny because that tracks so well with like even Git as a tool, or GitHub, right? It's a view into the history of your code base, and code reviews are a view into the history of your decision-making around code.
Yeah.
What, in your professional opinion, makes for a successful review process?
So there's a few different kinds of reviews. Like, usually I think of code reviews as being one of the last gates before this code gets merged. It's when the author of the code change feels like, yeah, this is done. I'm like emotionally moved on from this code change. Like CI, any automated tests, they have passed, they are green. Like, everything from my perspective is, it looks good. Let me have another human put their eyes on it. Sometimes I'll do kind of request for comment code reviews where it's like, I've got a pull request. It's still in draft state. I maybe haven't added tests at all. Things are breaking, but I just want commentary on, is this overall approach even like the right idea? Like, should I spend any more time going down this branch? And then I would bring in someone early for like just kind of a gut check on like the overall implementation. That kind of thing often I think will get hashed out in like the issue before even a pull request is open. But sometimes it's like you might do a spike PR to see like, I'm going to try, can I talk to this API? Can we store this in this database over here? Will this work at all? And you spike it out, and then like that's the kind of pull request that I would most often get like an early request for comment. Like, what do y'all think of this approach? Is this code that, were it fully tested and, conforming to style guide and standards and stuff, would you want it to be in the code base? I like to put up pull requests very early. So like if I've got like a bug that I'm fixing, some particular issue, I might add a test that fails and then open a pull request immediately. And it's like the pull request, I'm going to fix this bug, but all it does right now is just add a failing test. Like it's not doing anything to fix anything yet. I get that open early, and I'm not necessarily going to request my team on it immediately. It's more like just a breadcrumb trail to show that like, this is where I'm going. This is where I'm thinking. This is the stuff I've got on my plate right now. Once I get it to that kind of finished state, then like, so we use Slack at work. Wherever your team is kind of living and communicating, it's like you might depend on GitHub notifications or other people might have different processes of like, I know to check my inbox or the list of pull requests that I've been tagged for review on at like a certain time each day. I like going kind of notifications based. So like if I see someone in my Slack channel, like, hey, I've got this PR up for review, or if I notice it in my GitHub notifications inbox, like I'll go check it out right then. And then other people like doing kind of blocks, like this is my review time each day.
When you say you write the failing test, do you always do the test and the fix in the same pull request? Or is there a time where you would just pull request a failing test just to get it documented and then go back and fix it when there's some bandwidth for it?
No, so I could see you doing that. Like maybe you put in like a skipped test or a to-do test or something.
Yeah.
But I feel like those get lost. The same as like to-do comments in the code. It's like you put in that to-do comment, and I will find them
Yeah.
in the GitHub code base. And it's like, oh, this was added 10 years ago and it's still a to-do. Like that's where they go to die, in my experience.
Yeah.
I would rather open an issue for something like that. Maybe you chuck it in the icebox part of your project board or something. And it's just something capturing the information, the context that like, this is a problem we should deal with maybe someday. But yeah, I would typically put the failing tests along with the fix that makes them not fail in the same PR at once.
And what about like jockeying for somebody to actually review your code? Because sometimes that's the hardest part, is that like everybody's busy and I don't want to have to take time out of my day to work on it. I realize it's probably part of people's jobs, but that's something we see a lot, is how do you get somebody to actually review your code? And is there things you can do to make it easier on that person?
Yes. Okay. And that has historically, like every team I've been on, every company that I've been at, that has been an ongoing thing. So it's like a struggle. It's real. To make it easier, making smaller pull requests helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If I see that you've got like some 500 or greater line change and it's like across multiple files, and I see that you're doing a refactoring, but you're also like adding this new functionality, and maybe you're adding tests for that functionality, and the tests are huge. And like, if I say all that, it's going to be overwhelming. So I try and pay attention to my own like emotional reaction when I see a pull request from others and let that guide the kind of pull requests I ask for review on. And I will put together a pull request of my own, and then like I'll scan it myself before being like, hey team, please review this. Like I look through it, and is there anything where it's like, if I had not just spent, days or whatever working on this, I would wonder, what are they doing? Why is this in here? Did they really need to rename or move this code at the same time that they're making this other big functionality change? It's like you can kind of self-annotate your own pull requests to make it easier for other reviewers, or leave those questions that you find yourself asking, like let those guide you into like, maybe you need to make multiple pull requests here. Maybe this should be split up. I have a blog post that I wrote a few years back for GitHub on the GitHub blog. I can link as well for y'all, about my process of like, I get everything out in one giant PR just to like get my ideas on paper, as it were, and then worry about sorting it out into like, okay, this could really be like 3 separate PRs that are not a pain to review each. As for getting reviews, it kind of like it's come up on different teams that I've been on. Like you need to kind of ingrain it into your team philosophy of like code reviews are important. And like they become very obviously important when you have any kind of like merge restrictions on your repository, such that like you can't merge this unless it has an approving review. So it's like if you want any kind of shipping velocity, like you got to bake that into your team process. And some automations have been helpful. Like we use the GitHub Slack integration for putting like pull requests from our team, like notifying in our Slack channel where everyone kind of hangs out, like it's the home base channel for our team, that like so-and-so has a pull request up for review. And like kind of adopting the attitude within your team of code review is more important or more high priority compared to continuing to iterate on your own branches. So like stopping what you're doing is like, okay, I've got a break. I was going to, resume working on this PR that like, I see I've got some failing tests or there's merge conflicts or whatever. Like, let me put that on hold. Let me actually pick up and review my teammates' pull request because theirs is further along than mine. Like if you treat pull requests like the time at which you request review, if you do that after you feel done with it as the author and after like any automated tests have gone green, then that pull request is going to be further along than any PR that's still kind of being worked on, failing tests, not fully finished, like whatever. And that helps you to see kind of code review, I think, is more important than continuing that in-process work because it's closer to being over the finish line.
Yeah, that tracks a lot. And I feel that same way as like Wes sometimes when those code reviews come in, you're like, I'm busy. I'm doing stuff. But viewing it as more important is definitely something I think I need to do more of. You had mentioned in your post about when you're breaking up PRs into smaller PRs in smaller commits overall, the process of like using feature flags as being something to help with that. Do you have like a favorite feature flag system, or is there any way that you prefer to work in feature flags? And maybe give the audience too, like a 101 on what that is.
Yeah. So feature flags just being a way of conditionally choosing whether some new feature or change is experienced by your users. So we tend to, at GitHub, use Flipper by Jay Nunemacher. Sorry, that's his GitHub username. John Nunemacher? Anyway, it's a public repo on GitHub, Flipper. And you can control it based on the actor. So like, who's the authenticated user? Are they in this feature flag? Should they see this new page that we're building? Should they get the new version of this function that we think is going to be faster, but maybe is actually going to have some bugs or something? Like letting you control the rollout of something such that only 10% of your users, 50% of your users, all the users have this change enabled. It's really helpful for observability, for like looking at your exceptions, for logs, seeing like, oh, are they hitting this bug that we know only comes up with the new code? Like maybe we don't want to ramp up the feature flag. Like let's turn it off real quick. It's a helpful as like a kill switch for if you see a problem that only comes up within the feature flag, turn off the feature flag. Yeah, controlling like who's in it, maybe it's based on user, maybe it's a percentage of requests that you have it enabled for, that kind of thing. So big on using feature flags to make a pull request safer and less scary for review. Because like if any reviewer is like looking at your code change, they're like, this could break production, they're going to be less likely to approve it. And it's going to be harder to get that approval and harder to get it merged. So it's like make your stuff less scary. Like an easy way to do that is to shrink your pull request. So it's like, you can wrap your head around it when you look at this thing. So like, see, it's this tiny little baby PR. It's not going to break anything. And another way is to give outs, like put in a feature flag so that we don't have to go through another deploy. We don't have to ship more code to undo this change. Like if there's some big problem with it, we just like go into our feature flag management like app and turn off the feature flag, like much safer. And that can give a sense of security to your reviewers, because like especially if your reviewers, like often the team that would be reviewing my code change are also the team that would be on call if any of the code in our area like is broken and it could page you after hours. So like you want to kind of guarantee to these same folks that like, yes, this is safe. This isn't going to wake you up at night. You're not going to get paged because of this breaking change that I introduced. So we can just flip a feature flag, or it's clearly like innocuous change here.
Do you have any stories of that actually happening? Like something that has broken and you've gotten a call in the middle of the night?
Nothing is coming to mind for like particular features. I feel like it's been more systemic things where like some access to the database is like having a problem, or like this thing is slow and it's affecting our service as well as other services. I feel like most of the features I've worked on, it's like I'll notice when it's out there, like during my normal daytime hours, because like that's when other people would be using it as well, or that's when we'd get the high traffic, and like, oh, there's this exception that's occurring for this like percentage of users, and it turns out they're in when they have this particular setup, we're not accounting for this like situation, that kind of thing. I'm going to say the feature flags that I most use are for rolling out new features. Like there is another tool we use, Scientist. I think it's GitHub Scientist is our repo. I do believe that's public. I'll verify that. That's kind of like a feature flag, but it's mainly for assessing, is this new way of doing the same thing more performant? Does it give the right results? And so you set up like a scientist experiment to see like, did you get the same end result when you ran it through the new like SQL query that's supposed to give the same results but is faster, that kind of thing. And it's a nice tool to use because it'll end up using, you have the control and the experiment, it'll end up using the result from the control, which is like the old code that we know works, but maybe has some kind of problem that we're trying to resolve.
Yeah.
But it will still run the experimental side, so you get like an idea. It's like another kind of safety mechanism.
Like A/B testing against your refactored code. Was that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that run in production, or is that just something that runs like at the time you'd run tests as well?
I only see it. We use it in production with the I, because usually it's like I always see it done with things at scale.
So you'll run 100,000 people through the new code base and then take a look at the numbers, see if anything weird is happening?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Are we still getting the same results for like repositories you can access, or, you know, it's always around like complex queries or expensive queries, and making sure you still get the same end result, but in a more performant way. It's like run both of them, but just use the control for now until we trust the experimental code to promote it to being like the only code route, because we've verified with enough like actual data that like, yes, this does return the same result each time, and it is faster.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And how do you decide who goes through the new code base? Is it like, do you send employees through it, or is it just a random percentage?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember with Scientist. I feel like I've always ramped it up just percentage wise. Like you watch your exceptions, because they're getting the control, like the known result each time anyway. Like it feels safe. It will slow things down by design, because it's going to run both the control and the experimental branch of the code. So you're running like in parallel these kind of things, but then only using the control. So it feels safe enough, unless your experimental bit of code like has some nil reference or other kind of error that it's going to throw. Like it should be fine, because you're always getting back the known result. And it's just a matter of like, are you going to hit any rate limits? Are you going to slow down or back up some queue by running both branches at the same time? And that might be a reason to like keep the rollout percentage low. Like maybe only run this for like 5% of requests or 5% of users.
Oh, okay. Is that just for like pulling data, or could you also use that for like a mutation where like you delete a repo or fave something?
I feel like for something like that, you wouldn't want to do it where it's a destructive action for real. Like maybe you'd have it writing like a flag. I'd probably have that it write data of like, this is the one we would delete. And then you look at those logs, or you look at those records afterward of like,
okay.
It flagged the right ones for deletion in the experimental branch kind of thing.
Oh, okay. That's smart. Cool. That's really neat. I have not, I knew this type of thing existed, but it's really neat to get a sort of peer into how does it actually work at something so huge like GitHub.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole different scale than we're used to working at. I have linked, Scientist is a Ruby library,
Mhm.
But there is a JavaScript port of it, so I have linked that as well.
Yeah,
in the show-
from the folks at Trello, which is pretty
Trello
neat.
made it. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'll link that up in the show notes. I'm wondering, like, who on the team should code review? Because Wes and I and CJ, we just kind of like assign each other willy-nilly. But is there like who on the team should be the gatekeeper?
I think that's two different questions. So, like, who should be doing code review? Everyone. Who should be, like, the deciding, like, well, so-and-so approved, so I know I'm good to merge. Like, that's probably team dependent. Who do you trust to have context? Who has the most familiarity with, like, what we're trying to build here, what we're trying to do, like, that kind of thing. But for who should be doing code review at all, like, I want all the team to be doing it. One trap that I'll see folks fall into is like, oh, well, I see you already got that PR approved, so I don't need to look at it. It's like, no, I want your comments. You will see different things. You will call out different stuff just by the fact that you're a different person. Like, we all care about and notice different things. We have different particulars that it's like, oh, this is not going to be good for accessibility, or I've seen this cause a production problem before. Like, your experience will lead and shape your code review. And I want, like, all the different voices to be involved in that. And I love getting juniors. Like, this is something I will see juniors not want to leave a review or feel like, oh, well, I don't know enough or something to get in there. No, it's like, that's just a different kind of code review. I want someone who is less experienced, someone who's new to the team to come in with their new eyes and be like, this is weird, or I don't understand this, or this thing is not self-evident just from looking at your change here. Like, why would you do it that way? Like, is this just how it works? Is this, hard-coded over here? Is this documented somewhere? The kind of questions that they can ask in code review are very good for figuring out how to improve documentation, how to look at stuff, like if you've gotten used to it and realized, oh yes, this is the ugly clunky bit that we used to be aware of, but we've just kind of gotten used to it. And it's like, that is kind of a pain. And anytime we want to onboard new people to the team or someone else has to inherit this code base, it's like they're going to deal with that weirdness too. Like, making this stuff documented, putting it in an issue is like, yeah, maybe we'll get to that someday kind of thing. Even, like, I love when people will ask questions on a pull request. Like, if they don't feel comfortable saying, like, yeah, this is good enough to be merged, or this looks right, or whatnot, that's fine. Asking questions gives me the platform to get on there and ramble about why I did do it this way. Like, it has to be this way because it will break this other thing if we don't, or because this issue over here is what happens when it's, like, done this other way. Like, this team here learned that we need to implement it in this particular way, and so I've tried doing that here, or this is the guidance for whatnot. I love just having that space, and then that becomes part of this written record of this pull request that future people will find through searches. They will wonder, why was it written this way? Why did it get implemented this way? And you might see that discussion happening in pull request comments. Like, they find your old pull requests and they can see, like, well, here's the screenshots of what it looked like when I didn't do it that way. And, at the time, it's like we had this constraint, or we wanted to ship it by this time. And, like, that's why we chose to do it the way we did. I love just preserving those kind of the history and context, and getting questions from folks who have new eyes or less experienced eyes to the thing is a great way of preserving that context.
You even mentioned reviewing your own code. I have in the show notes here, Obama putting a medal on Obama, that meme. So what's up with reviewing your own code? Yeah.
Okay. This is a habit I picked up from my coworker, Paul C. Smith is his GitHub username. It's very helpful for, like, again, you're super familiar with your branch by the time you've finished with it. So you know why you did this, like, weird little bit. You know why you applied that particular class in your HTML, or why you used this library instead of that one, because you were the one that was banging your head on it to get it to work originally. Some of the stuff that you chose to do might not be obvious. It might be necessary, but it might not be self-documenting. And so you kind of make that explicit, like, write it down in a comment. Like, I will comment on my own pull requests all the time, like, highlighting, this is the big change. This was just a refactoring to make it more in line with, this style guide thing, or this bit of guidance that we have of, like, this is the preferred way, or doing this bit makes it more accessible. Like, whatever I did, like, even if it's something where if you think about it, like, when you look at the code, it's like, oh, I see why she would do this. I will sometimes call attention to it to point out, like, this is helping us with this other issue and like link back to bits of things. Like this one little line here I want to highlight is like, this is load bearing. This is doing something important, or this is, improving something in this way.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, well, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right.
At what point should that be a comment versus something on the pull request?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts of where that line is?
I like to add code comments on tests if the test is like a response to an issue we hit in production. Like, this is something a real user experienced. Like, go look here for details. I don't often leave code comments in HTML views, so I will note things just in pull request comments there. I don't know, because it's a fine line. And sometimes, like, this will come up, too, that one can lead to the other. So, like, often when I'm reviewing other people's code, I'll ask them, why'd you do it this way? Or, like, usually it's where did you get this? Like, you hard-coded this string. You hard-coded, like, this URL. Where is that coming from? Especially when making API calls or something. Like, you're using this third-party API, and you put in this thing that looks magical and load-bearing. Where is that coming from? Is there a documentation URL you can put here as a comment?
Oh, yeah.
If they reply to me on the pull requests, I'll be like, can you put this as a code comment? Like, preserve it to make it easier to find for someone, like when they see the code directly later. If you'd like them to have this information immediately upon seeing the code that it's relevant to, as opposed to, now, which PR added this? Did they note anything in the PR? Let me go track down the issue behind the PR. Like, how many steps should a future reader have to take to get that context?
I'm curious, if we were to go through my code base or a syntax code base, there's lots of links to tweets of me just figuring things out in the open, or like Stack Overflow or GitHub discussion of like, this is weird, but this is why we do it this way.
Totally. Yeah. And a lot of that is from my future self too, even not just for my team. Future self does not always remember what past self was thinking, for sure. I'm curious about, like, I don't know if this is the case at GitHub, and I have no idea, but I know a lot of developers have big egos about their code and they think that their code is the right way every time. How do you deal with egos in the code review process?
Some of it, I think, can be helped with asking for evidence. Like, if there's a disagreement about, like, oh, this is going to be a problem versus not, getting them to prove it one way or the other with a test. Like, we don't have to just talk about this. We could put in a test that shows, like, it will behave in this desired way when we hit it under this scenario. That can kind of, it makes it, like, less personal. It's like, oh, I'm not, like, arguing with you, the person. It's like, we're going to make the machine tell us, like, what will actually happen. And that can make it easier, I think, because it's not like a personal attack. It's just, we're going through the bits here. Otherwise, I don't know. Team personalities, I think it can help to pair program with someone to get to know them, like, personally. It's also helpful, like, so we're a remote company. Being able to meet with your teammates in person, I think, helps a lot to just get to see them as more than just the face that you see weekly in Zoom kind of thing, and get a feel for, like, what they care about, how they respond, like, what is their personality and sense of humor. Such that when you see that very dry, bare bones, like, kind of comment that's maybe criticizing on your pull request, it's like you might interpret it differently because you know the person behind it. It's like, oh yeah, that's just how he talks. Like, he's fine. He's not, like, being mean here or anything. That's just the direct personality. So getting a feel for who they are as people, I think that makes it easier when you receive criticism in code review on, like, it's my baby. I wrote this thing. I know it works. It's, like, perfect. And then you get, like, some more critical comment of it. It's like you can interpret that better if you've got some kind of relationship established with this person. And then vice versa. I think my feedback can come better, like, be better received when my teammates have, like, interacted with me and sat down to a meal with me, if you're able to get together in person, or just having, like, a one-on-one on occasion, like, even in just a video call to get to know the people.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, you can definitely read the same text in so many different ways. And by putting someone's personality behind that, I think that changes it substantially. I always think about that with emails. And if you don't know the person, like how can you craft this so it's less ambiguous? Your tone, right? Tone is so hard to convey in that kinds of stuff. I know a big part of like a successful process of merging code into a code base of any size is like automation. What types of automation do you feel is like essential? Like what would you need?
I get a lot of mileage out of notifications for when something is ready. We use like a GitHub action for checking like the status of CI, the required builds, being like, okay, it's fully passing now, so all the required tests are okay, and like notifying that either by marking the draft pull request as not a draft, and then in response to that, we have like a Slack integration such that like non-draft PRs opened by our team get dumped into our team Slack channel, getting visibility on stuff. The PRs that are ready that are not mine, so that I know to review them. The PRs that are ready that are mine, so that my team can see them. I have a repo it's a public repo under my account, so Cheshire137 on GitHub, for moving pull requests around in a project board, because I use a project board to keep track of my work, and knowing like, is this thing conflicting with the base branch? Is it kind of daisy chained so it's not against main, it's against some feature branch, and like I'm hoping to eventually one day shuffle it into main. I'm very big on stacked PRs or daisy chained PRs, keeping track of them that way and knowing like these are the ones that have a failing test. These are the ones that have conflicts and can't be merged. These are the ones I'm still waiting on reviews from, or these are just ready to deploy, and maybe I should get in the merge queue now. The visibility, knowing what state everything is in.
Let's talk about stylistic. Minor nit is what everybody used to say, and I think probably still to a point, but comments on a pull request about indentation, camel case versus snake case. Do you see that still a lot, or is that kind of it's sort of gone because of linters and formatters?
I'll see stuff where there aren't linters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we don't have linters, I think, on our ERB files at GitHub, and I'll see comments about like, can we wrap this because it's so long or whatnot. I'm all right with comments like that, and I'll make them from time to time too. Like if it's going to help readability, that's a big thing for me. But I'm never too strict about it. Like you can do this or not. Take this, as you like it. If you do choose to do it, you don't have to do it in this PR. You can make a follow-up PR that like addresses all these things, whatever. For me, if we care about it, it should be in some automated linter. And if we don't have it automated, then like we must not care about it that much. So like it can't be that big a deal. So I would rather have an automated linter to enforce all that stuff, to just like take it off the mental load.
And what about like formatting for indentation, things like that?
Whatever the style guide says. Like if we have this in a linter, it's like I don't have to personally agree with it. I will conform to it. It's like that's what the code base does.
Automatic.
Like,
yeah.
And the big fight always is, should that be done at author time before the pull request, or should the style, the indentation, like author it however you want, but the formatter will take care of it when you send the pull request?
We use some pre-push hooks, and I've kind of come around to them. Like, there's some that will validate, like, linting and, like, are all the rubocops passing, that kind of thing. As long as they're fast, that's all I care about. So, like, a pre-push hook to stop me from sending my commits to, origin is fine as long as it's not too slow, because I like to push commits, like, fire it and forget it. I want to get back to what I'm doing. This is just...
Yeah.
Like, I send it, and I don't want to have to think about it. So if it, like, cancels that, because, like, oh, you failed this linter, that's annoying. And I want that feedback to be very quick if it's going to do that. I honestly, like, I am happy to have, like, once I push my stuff up to GitHub, if some automation runs and makes a commit on my branch that just runs the automated linter, that's fine, too. Like, I don't care if I then have to pull before I can push more commits because, like, something changed on origin. I don't know. A lot of people don't like for the bots to push to their branch, and they'd rather just see a failing test. I would rather have the tests be green and have the bots committing to my branch personally.
Yeah, it seems like that might save some time. Are there any underutilized tools in this process that you don't feel like people are caught onto yet? Maybe
daisy chaining PRs in general. A big problem, I think, is just having too large a PR. If you have too many changes, if your diff is too big, you're going to scare everybody. You're not going to get fast reviews. You're not going to get thorough reviews. Having smaller PRs where everything that you are adding in that branch is well tested, it's easy to read, it's in like a good place, it's organizationally in the code. That's preferable to me than having one big PR that does the whole feature at once. It's like, invariably, there's going to be some part of that new feature that's not well tested because your PR is already like 2,000 lines. I can't add on this extra test that involves like a snapshot file or a VCR cassette that's going to be hundreds of lines itself. Like, make room for it by having a new separate pull request. And I will use stacked PRs, daisy-chained PRs, to get all of my work out, but in like reviewable sized chunks. So it's like the first branch maybe adds the new method with all of its thorough test coverage. And like nothing's calling that method yet, so it's safe to land. And then like a follow-up branch will actually use the method, and I'll just base it, instead of basing it off of main, I'd base it off of the first branch that added the method, and then like after I've got the method in, I add the new endpoint that uses it, and then I add the UI that like exposes access to the new endpoint, like dunk, 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 like. And I wish people would do daisy-chained PRs more, because I think it really encourages having smaller PRs that are each reviewable by themselves, and like you can look at the overall chain of PRs to get like the full story of like, by the time this last PR lands, we will have this whole feature spread out.
Nice.
And what about commits then? Do you do multiple commits per pull request? And if you do you squash?
So I do multiple commits per PR, and I don't squash just because that's the repo setup that we have. Like, I've contributed to open source repos. Rails is the main one that I can think of, where they want it all squished down to a single commit by the time the PR merges. And so like your whole PR will be one commit, and it might be a ginormous commit. I don't care for that, because I like the pull requests to be like the unit of work, and like I'm not as concerned about the individual commits. I like having many commits to work with, because that makes it easier to cherry pick particular things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
I agree.
My commit might be add the test for thing, and then like a later commit, actually make the thing, like add the new method, or like refactor this thing or something. Because I like doing the stacked PRs, and like how I get to a stacked PR setup is I'll often start with like, let's implement the whole feature at once in this one giant branch, and then later I'll tease that out. And it's easier to tease out the different chunks of it if I have the more atomic commits. So like, I don't care about like a clean commit history. I like looking at the PR as like the unit of like, this is when that feature was introduced.
Yeah, we've changed the syntax repo over to squash. And part of it, I don't mind. Like if I do a whole bunch of mess, or I make a commit like on a Friday, and then on Monday I pick it up, and then I might squash that just before I put in a pull request. But as soon as you start to like branch off, or like you merge it and you've squashed it, and then something else depends on that, it becomes kind of a pain in the butt to work with it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you said that. You heard it from GitHub.
Wes, I prefer not to squash. I don't know who made that decision.
I think it was Ben.
Let's
have a talk with him.
Yeah, Ben showed up and changing our way of doing things.
Well, I think Ben changed it to no merge commit, which I think also flipped on the squashing. I forget.
I don't know.
Look into it.
Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah.
I feel like looking at the commit history can show you what the person was thinking, like the struggles they went through, like how you ended up with the final thing. It's like
the swear words.
Yes, the 8 commits trying to get the GitHub action to working. Yeah.
Yeah, so it tells a story by itself. Maybe it's not the granularity or the story they're interested in when you're trying to figure out, well, which actual merge like broke the thing. And so I could see why having each PR as like a single commit in your main history could be useful.
So actually, I'll link to the blog post you did, the secrets, the GitHub hacks and pro tips and hacks and secrets or whatever. You described the daisy chaining really well in there. So listeners, if you want to see some examples of that's in that blog post. What kind of like branching system do you use over at GitHub? I know that's like such a different type of scale, but like we just kind of keep a main branch. And then we're always merging into main off of that with the PRs. Is that pretty typical?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we do as well. It's like if I'm going to work on a new feature, if I'm going to fix a bug, it'll get its own branch. I will branch off of, it's still master in our repo. We haven't renamed. There were some dependencies that were leaning on it being hard-coded to master. Many of the repos I work in do have main as like the main branch. We will tag releases, I believe, for like GitHub Enterprise versions, but like otherwise just kind of working off of main or master, doing feature branches off of those, and then daisy chaining the feature branches. I don't like rebasing because of the destruction that comes with it. Like, especially if I'm working with someone else on a branch. So it's like, oh, we're working on like my teammate's branch. So it's like we'll both be pushing commits to it and whatnot. And it's nice if you don't have to do any force pushes because like someone rebased off a master and I don't want to blow away these changes and whatnot. So yeah, shared branches I think is great. But usually it'll be like one person to a branch and like we might pair together and like we're committing to my branch or something, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about rebasing. I feel like anytime I do anything, people are like, rebase?
It's so destructive.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to rebase a lot, and I think I got burned like once, and I was just like, never again, you know?
Yeah.
Shouldn't have done that. Oh, man. Have you guys ever... I'm just curious about inside of GitHub, but do you have any hilarious stories of like Git going wrong inside of GitHub? Because Git's hard, and I'm sure it's hard for people that work at GitHub.
The most common one that I see is when someone will ping like every reviewer. So we do stuff by code owner. It's like, oh, this team owns the discussions feature. And so if you're modifying discussions code, it will tag the discussions team for review. And people will end up, this happens regularly, like new devs, they always feel so bad. It's like, I've got my pull request. I was branched off of someone else's branch. I wasn't branched off of main, but then I merged main into my branch when the branch that I was based off of was not up to date with the latest main. So suddenly I bring in a billion changes, everything that's landed in main. And it's like, I just ping the world because every team is getting like tagged on my PR now. My PR is like 30,000 changes when really it was supposed to be like 30. And they feel so bad. They're like, I don't know what happened. I'm just going to close this PR and make a new one. And like, I think it's a great way to kind of meet the other devs. It's like, oh, I see what you were working on here. I got tagged for review on this. Let me just come say hi to like everyone getting pinged now.
A rite of passage.
Yeah, kind of.
That's happened to me a million times where, yeah, you fork off a branch, you merge main, and there's been 20,000 commits since then. And then you see them all as part of your pull request and you go, what did I do? So what's the correct way to solve that and not ping the world?
So if your PR is a draft, I think notifications won't happen. So it's like you can end up with like your 30,000 lines of change because you accidentally merged in master, but hopefully none of those teams will get actually pinged because your PR is still in draft mode. So every PR I keep that's not based off the main branch, I keep it in draft. Because like approvals are going to get dismissed anyway when the base branch changes. So it's like I might as well wait.
Yeah.
But no, the ideal thing is like, it's like dealing with a loom or crocheting or something. You need to pull main through the whole daisy chain. Don't just like skip the branch in the middle. Like you got to pull main to branch number 1, and then you're branched off of branch number 1. We'll pull branch number 1 into branch 2 and all the way through. But yeah, it's also fun. Like if you've done this and it's like, I don't know what happened here. I can't clean this up. Let me just close this PR and open a new one and find what the right base branch should be based on what I just merged in here.
That's good. Cool. Thank you.
You were the team anchor and tech lead on GitHub sponsors. That feels like a big old project. How big of a project is that? And like, what is that like to work on at GitHub? Such a big thing.
Sponsors is fun. It is different too. Cause like we are actively taking your money, not to keep it. Like, let's take your money and then just give it to this other person. So that was weird. Because like no other feature on GitHub is like that. You know, if the others take your feature or take your money, it's like that's for GitHub. And so we had to be very careful about like marking these funds correctly, and like they have to go through the right like channel and stuff. And like you're dealing with a very legacy, like an aspect of the code base that's been there for forever. Because like GitHub has always been able to take your money, right? Like we've always had a billing system, but then GitHub sponsors came out in like 2019, 2020, something like that. So several years after the start of GitHub. So it's like we're using a very old system that had to be updated to work with this novel way of dealing with money. Like, we want to take your money but not keep it, and also like give you receipts and reporting on where that money went. So it was just strange. Like, you'd run into interesting stuff because of that. It was really fun though. So like, I'm not on the sponsors team anymore. I've been working on just various other things, but it was really fun because of the nice impact that it would have, where you'd see posts from like Caleb Porzio talking about how he made like $100K a year or something with sponsors, and seeing the results of this, like when GitHub would sponsor like some new set of maintainers or something, or seeing posts coming out from the maintainers, tweets from like what they've been able to achieve, or like how this let them, stop working on this other thing and they get to focus full time on open source. Like, I love that. So it was such a like feel good thing to work on.
Yeah, and Sentry does a ton there. In Syntax, they built some kind of tool. I don't know what the name of this tool is, but they set up Syntax so that every single dependency that we use in our code base gets a percentage of Sentry's funds to distribute. So it's like, it allows for stuff like that to support these projects that we just kind of mindlessly use all the time.
It's thanks.dev.
Thanks.dev?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, super cool. When you're working on something like that, I know you said you're accepting a lot of money and you have to be careful about the sources. Is legal like combing over every single line of code, making sure? Is that like a deeply involved process?
No, it would be more like checkpoints, where it's like we would implement a thing, or we'd have like this new feature where we want to start like allowing payments from this area, or we want to turn off PayPal payments because of this or whatnot. And there'd be like a review process where it's like, we describe, here's what we're going to do. Is this cool to like go forward with? And then like after the implementation, like, okay, let's do a security review. Let's do a privacy review. Let's have folks look through the actual code and the things all at once. Like, once it's done from our perspective, kind of like the team implementing it. So it wouldn't be like an ongoing, like while we're figuring it out process.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Next part of the show is where we get into sick picks and shameless plugs, where a sick pick can be anything you're enjoying, and a shameless plug can be something you would like to share with everybody to plug. So do you have a sick pick for us today?
I do. All right. So this is for gamers. So I'm big on PC gaming, and like I usually have a nice like setup. I like to, it's like I'll play at my desk after in the day and stuff. But like I've recently got a Steam Deck. And I didn't think I would enjoy this thing as much as I have, but it's been wonderful. Like, I've enjoyed playing like on a Switch where it's like, oh, let me sit on the couch, let me go lay down in the hammock out in the yard or something. But like, I didn't think about that for PC games, because it's like I have such a nice gaming PC with like the big monitor and display. Why would I want to play on like the tiny little thing? But no, it's very pleasant. Like, I like that I can just be, it's like, I don't want to sit at a desk after I've been on the computer all day. Like, let me go stretch out and just like lay down with this game. And a surprising thing to me is the kind of games that are so nice on the Steam Deck. So like, I love Fallout New Vegas, and that is the oldest game. And it does not look great on like my big fancy monitor unless I have some like graphics mods and stuff that like impacts stability of it. Because it's like, it's an older game. It's not going to look as good as it did back in the day. But you play it on the Steam Deck, like I've got the OLED screen view, and it's a really nice screen on there, but just by the fact that it's such a small screen, like it makes these older games look wonderful. And so like, it's a great way to play this game again.
I love my Steam Deck. And like you said, it's almost the only way I play games anymore, because I don't have a good PC, but I have a PlayStation, and I don't play my PlayStation on the TV. I stream it to my Steam Deck. And then the Steam Deck battery lasts forever, because I don't want to monopolize the TV if my wife wants to watch TV or something like that. So it's like, yeah, now I got the Steam Deck. Also, Wes, I don't know if you know anything about this device, but you get access to the actual Linux install on there. So you can do anything that you can do on Linux on here. You can even install Windows on it if you're adventurous enough. But yeah, this thing rules. Yeah.
It is a really solid, like, it's just a nice piece of hardware. I love too, Valve's attitude. Like, if you're reading the specs page and stuff, they advertise that they use Torx screws now. So it's like easier for repair and replace and like do whatever. And it's like, oh, they like are sharing what kind of screw they use, because everybody loves Torx screws. Like, that's so nice.
Yeah.
Just a lot of detail.
Yeah, I love it. What about that shameless plug?
We just talked about this, but like, I was going to say GitHub sponsors, because I feel like there are people that are building Like they've got public repos and it's like, oh, it's just this dinky little project. Like I don't even know if people are using it. Like why would anyone want to pay me? Get up there on GitHub sponsors, like make a sponsors profile. Somebody will pay you. Like folks will look around and just try and find like, oh, here's this dinky little library that I do happen to be using. Let me pay them some money for it. Like folks would like to pay you if only they were able to. And like, I don't know. I like platforms like sponsors, like Patreon. And of course, sponsors has integration with Patreon. So you can pay someone via Patreon if you've already like given your credit card info to Patreon or something. I like platforms like that just as like convenient centralizations where you're not having to enter your credit card information to some new thing. It's like just this one site and I pay for all, like, let me support these open source maintainers all in one place. And so I just want more people to have sponsors profiles so we can throw money at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's effortless too. I know, like we mentioned that Syntax sponsors things, but when I had my own company, it was just so easy to give a percentage, give anything here and there. So yeah, if you have a business, help support the things that you're relying on. I love that. So thank you so much, Sarah. This has been incredible getting to pick your brain on this stuff. It's going to change our process a bit. So hopefully if you're listening out there that you can pick up some new tips and tricks from Sarah. So thank you so much.
Yeah thanks so much for having me.